As much as digital recording techniques have taken away the role of performed instruments in modern music, the internet has also created a new place for musicians to show their creative skills. We now have the phenomenon of the internet guitarist, and this is influencing how all guitarists sound. But in a world where everybody can hear what everybody else sounds like, does this just foster conformity and sameness? On this video, I'm going to be asking the question, why do all modern guitarists sound the same?
Some of you will have clicked on this because you've gone, yes, Andy, you're right. You're right there. They do all sound the same. I've noticed that, and I want you to tell me why. I want you to agree with my opinion. Then there's other people, other guitarists who are fans of modern guitarists. Maybe they like Animals and Leaders, or that chap that looks like the tattooed doll that plays in that band. I can't remember his name. You know the one? The one that's, Tim Henson, that's it. I have to think Muppets. There's him. He doesn't sound like anybody else. He's always plinking and plucking, does it? And so you probably come here to get really angry. But before we start, you've got to remember that the title of this video is a question. It's a question that somebody might ask. And the answer might be, no, they do sound different. But I believe there's a kernel of truth in that statement. A few weeks ago, I had YouTube on and I went out the room. And eventually, this guitarist came on and they were doing this guitar solo. And this guitar solo went nowhere. It was just the same licks over and over again. And this guitarist was playing for about 20 minutes straight. I thought, my God, who's this? It's the same stuff over and over again. So I walked into the room to see what had auto played on my YouTube channel. Well, not my YouTube channel, but on YouTube. And there was this compilation of guitarists. None of them famous, just people, that are on the internet, Instagram guitarists, and they'd all sort of put their guitar solo down to this thing and they'd edited it all together. What shocked me was that taking the structure of something like that, taking the structure that you've got this big 20-minute tune and you're going to have like 50 guitarists playing over it, you would have thought, to keep it interesting, that the guitarist would have tried to do something unique. But in fact, the opposite was quite apparent. What they were doing was exactly the same set of licks with exactly the same guitar tone. Their phrasing was identical. They all started with some sort of melodic thing, and then they went to some fast thing, usually that was tapped. Then they come back down, you might get the obligatory blues lick, or maybe some weird scale. There was a little bit of a variation. Then you'd get some really fast picking and some sweeping, and then they would be done. And then the next guy would come out and do exactly the same thing. And when I say exactly the same thing, I'm talking about exactly the same licks, right? And I thought this is really, really interesting. And it's quite obvious that this would happen. Now, on this video, rather than being negative, and believe me, I will get negative at the end of this video, but rather than being negative, I wanted to offer something a little bit more positive, all right? Now, about 2 years ago, as happens, somebody said to me, you need to check this guitarist out. This happens all the time. And I was to click on, and there we have one of these incredible, technical, modern Instagram guitarists, like you've just seen at the beginning of this video, doing all the same licks. And I'm not interested. I've heard it all before. I find it tiresome. And somebody clicked on this. But the thing was, they'd said, this is the fastest guitarist in the world. Well, that piques my interest. How fast is this bloke going to be? So I clicked on the video, and it was a video of the guitarist Roy Marchbank. As I started to watch it, his speed was astonishing. But what was more interesting to me was his sound and his tone and his phrasing and his note choice and the dynamics, and every aspect of it was as freaky as how fast he was playing. I was far more interested in the individuality and uniqueness of this. When I looked at the comments, Roy, who should really be a household name amongst guitarists because he is technically so much more incredible than the sort of guitarist you saw at the beginning of this clip, Roy was being criticised by the guitar community. They were saying that he had faked what he was doing, that it wasn't real. I looked at it, and being a musician and guitarist and being relatively knowledgeable about guitar, I could see that Roy was really playing it. I could see it wasn't sped up. I could see that it was quite possible using the techniques that he was using to play at that speed. He develops his own way of positional playing. There's no actual positional playing with Roy's playing. He had got a different way of picking. He was coming up from under the strings, and that was enabling him to pick very, very fast. I could see where it was coming from. It was quite obvious that it wasn't faked. Even if it had been faked, there was still too much astonishing stuff in there to think, how would you pull this off? It was quite obvious that this wasn't a fake. But when I started to look into it, right, and I did a number of videos of this at the time, there was a huge pushback. And what it was is as though the guitar world was protecting what we saw at the beginning of this video. They wanted everything nice and in its place. They wanted guitarists to have a certain tone, play in a certain way. They wanted them to play certain licks. So they wanted to be measured amongst that. On top of this, there was a number of YouTubers that sat there holding court, telling everybody how the guitar should be done. And many of these were accusing Roy of not being able to do what he was doing. These guitarists were sort of trading on the fact that they knew about technique. They knew how to do this stuff, and they were explaining it to everybody. And it got me thinking, if you have this structure where there's people buy guitar, they have no intention of being in a band, they are going to set up at home, they're going to get some recording equipment and a camera, right? And they're going to start playing the guitar, and they're going to go online and they're going to see these Uber guitarists. So these Uber guitarists are going to tell them what to do, and they're going to say, this is a cool lick, so that kid will learn that lick, right? And then when he's learnt the lick and he can play it better, or she's learnt the lick, then they're going to come on and say, that's really good, let's have a look at these licks. And they're going to champion certain guitarists. And these guitarists are going to rise up in this big sort of cake of the same thing, right? Nobody in this structure has gone through what used to exist in the music business in the old days, which is where to become a guitarist and have a deal, you had to have a signature sound, right? So I'm going to come back to this in a bit, but I want to tell you what happened because it's quite interesting. I came in on that video of Roy and I said, no, this is really being done. He's really playing it. And I started to argue, because you know how argumentative I am, especially on YouTube comments. So I started to argue with a few people. And eventually Roy saw this and he reached out and we started having a discussion. And I realised that Roy's intention was not to be the fastest guitarist in the world. The speed he was playing at was a byproduct of his drive to try and do something new on guitar and to be able to forge his own voice. Now, if we go back to someone like Alan Holdsworth, this was his mission statement. He wasn't particularly interested in playing fast or legato speed and all these weird scales. It was to express what he had in his head. When he saw somebody copying him, he found it quite upsetting, and Holdsworth was tortured by the fact that if he heard another guitarist playing one of his licks, he no longer would play that lick. It's interesting, you know, in the last few years of his life that no recordings came out as the internet rose. And I just wonder how much he was just looking at what other guitarists were doing and going, well, I can't do that and I can't do that. And before we knew it, all these clones had actually undone his creativity, right? Roy was trying to do the same thing. We got talking, and about 2 years ago, we decided to form a band. I had a friend called Mark Hartley that I'd done an album with at that time. He was a virtuoso bass player. But the intention was to try and do something different, particularly with these stringed instruments, the bass and the guitar. And we started doing it. Now, this album's taken 2 years to do. It has been a lot of work. There's one thing going in and making a prog album, and you're trying to make a really good album, and maybe you're trying to put some interesting things in, but you're pretty much working within the genre. You know what you're trying to do. But with this album, guided by Roy would not be happy unless he felt he'd done something unique with his guitar playing. Well, after 2 years' work and a lot of trials and tribulations, this album is now finished. I would say that it is perhaps the most groundbreaking album that I have ever played drums on. All I'm doing throughout this album is keeping time behind these two guys, but these two guys, I think, have renegotiated what the guitar is about. Part of it's done through technically, the technical things that they're utilising, but much more, it's been an exploration of guitar synthesis, something that's been around now for like 40 years, but has still not been fully explored, I don't think. I think Roy's main mission statement with this album was to try and realistically use a guitar synth in a way that was compelling, not in a way that you just wish that they'd go back and play something with some nice distortion on, because that route ends up with the guitarist we've seen at the beginning of this video. So the album's coming out on the 4th of August. We've got an album launch at Lode Street Studios on the 4th of August. We put a lot into this. This isn't a digital only release like a lot of my releases. This is a proper CD. You can buy it and you can covet it, all right? And you can pre-order that now. The link will be down below. I would like to show you the first promo video from this album. Now, this is a promo video. You do see me and Roy in it, but we are not playing along to the track. We were just in there in a sort of psychedelic haze, right? What you're going to see is a bunch of hopefully enjoyable images to go along with these tracks, focusing on the musical aspects. We would be a lot happy if you watch this and go, well, I really enjoyed that. That was actually a nice piece of music. And then turn around and go, well, what's going on in the guitar is very interesting. So what you're about to hear is a track, the first track released off this new album. It's called Deja Vu. No, it's not. It's called Deja Funk. And everything you're about to hear has been created by guitar, bass and drums. Now, you're going to hear something that sounds like a big band, but it is in fact Roy playing everything live, right? There's no editing or any of this. He's played everything live and he's created a huge ensemble, and everything that you are hearing, including the insane Coltrane sax solos and all that stuff, has been created by Mr. Roy Marchbank on guitar. Right, so we'll watch that video, and then when you come back, we're going to have a proper chat about what I think is going on. So I hope you enjoyed that little video, and I hope it's piqued your interest. Like I said, the link is down below. We have self-funded this album. It's very difficult in this day and age to make albums like this, especially physically. So get the CD presses cost money. So if you want to go and support us, you can. You can support us by downloading Deja Funk. It's there. You can download it for free if you want, but if you want to put a little bit of money in, that would be very helpful. You could buy an album and order it, and you will get it posted out to you on the 4th of August. And if you live in the UK, especially in the Midlands, and you want to come and see us do this stuff live, you can buy a ticket all over on the Law of Three Bandcamp. I am very excited about this album. And the reason why I'm excited is because I enjoy being involved in something that's different. I enjoy having my creativity challenged. I enjoy the satisfaction of thinking, well, this album doesn't sound like everybody else's. No one's really made an album like this before. All right? Is it a jazz rock album? I don't know. Is it a prog album? I don't know. Is it electronica album? There's a lot of synthesis on there. I don't know. I don't think so. Right? Some of the tunes are really hyper composed. Some of them are completely improvised. There's a lot of improvisation on there. Is it jazz? Right? That piques my interest. Now, going back to what I'm seeing with the guitar, I'm now going to give you my sort of overall view. Of course, there will always be creative, interesting guitarists around. All right? They will be there. But I think the climate for them to operate in is not the best. As I said before, I think the internet has enabled people to not have to join a band to play. They can quite happily sit in their bedroom. They don't need an amp. They can have a virtual amp. They can plug into their computer. They can download backing tracks from various places. They can sit and record their guitar solos and put their iPhone up like this and film themselves doing it. They can stick on Instagram. And if they're good, and I mean good within the parameters of this world, they will get some followers. They will get something back. And that is rewarding. They can look at their heroes that are technically better than them. It all starts to become about measurement. They're measuring themselves. Can you play that lick? No, I can play that lick. If you see this guy, they can play that lick really loud. Right? It promotes conformity. The whole structure promotes conformity. Now, if this wasn't there, it could well be the case that the guitar would be dead now, because the guitar's not really needed in music anymore. No instruments are really needed in music anymore. That producers can make music without having to record for guitar. If you hear a guitar on a record, it's an effect. It's a foible. It's a feature, right? Like when the Beatles put one of those classical trumpet sounds, that wasn't the sound of a rock music band. That was in there as a feature, All those classical Handel-esque trumpet players weren't going, oh, brilliant, yeah, we can get a deal in rock music, because they wasn't there. The guitar now occupies that space. The guitar is the most important instrument in an era which is now drawing to a close. So we have to thank Instagram. We have to thank the internet. We have to thank the fact that, musicians can get their stuff out there, albeit to a much smaller audience, but still an audience which is instantly able to shower them with some, love if they conform to the rules. Right? So this starts to become a lot closer to a sport than music. Now, there is nothing wrong with that, except that the people within that run it become gatekeepers. And obviously, when somebody comes along who's doing something else, those gatekeepers may not be able to recognize something original. There is no longer a music industry where that person can go and get a deal and be championed by a label. Right, now I'm going to give you an example of when this did happen. 40 years ago in the early 80s, just as that sort of guitar shred thing was emerging, a guy was busking on the streets of America. He was called Stanley Jordan, and he developed a completely new way of playing the guitar. He would play chords and bass lines with this hand, and he would play melodies and solos with this hand, and he would play it like a piano. He'd taken the tapping technique that Eddie Van Halen had made so popular, but he'd utilised it in a completely new way. He was spotted by Blue Note Records And Blue Note Records signed him. And although this guy was basically a jazz musician playing jazz standards, the backing of that label and good marketing, and the fact that Stanley Jordan seemed like to have a nice aura about him, when he appeared, he smiled, the whole thing, he exuded charisma, which is what very essential for a guitar hero. And he could pull these incredible things off. Here in the UK, we had a pop music program called The Tube. On one day, it was punctuated by two solo musicians. One was Mark King from Level 42, came on and did an incredible slap bass solo. And then Stanley Jordan came on and played Eleanor Rigby using this two-hand technique. This was on mainstream television. At that point, every guitarist was talking about it. And we all ran out to get Stanley Jordan's solo album. Right? We bought it because he sounded different to any other guitarist. Now, this is true of two other guitarists that I discovered around about the same time. I'm talking about, it was like a set of weeks that went by. And I can remember Yngwie Malmsteen, Rising Force, Flexible, Steve Vai, Stanley Jordan's first album. Those three albums all sort of landed at the same time. Now, if we take Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen, and Stanley Jordan, right, you could see there that those three guitarists would be instantly recognizable. Now, Malmsteen and Steve Vai are ostensibly in the same ballpark, aren't they? They're sort of, technical rock metal guitarists. They both played in Anthrax, in Alcatraz. But Steve Vai had some, difficulty replacing Yngwie Malmsteen because their sound and their approach was so completely different. And this wasn't about technique. It was about musical vision. All right? Steve Vai had a musical vision. He had a desire to make compositions and create his own world. The same was true of Yngwie Malmsteen. The same was true of Stanley Jordan. What's interesting in Stanley Jordan is as he has grown up and matured, because the guy must be older than me, so he must be around about 60 now. In his own personal time, I have heard that he has moved towards making electronic music, electronica. And the reason for that is because the reason why he had developed that approach on guitar was to somehow get out the musical ideas that he had inside himself. Now, this is something that I think the current guitar world does not appreciate. There is nothing conducive at the moment for guitarists who actually play the guitar to express themselves, that there is a route for them. Because the conformity that exists within the guitar world at the moment is so rigid. Now, we saw this with the guitar shredders in the 1980s. The record companies pricked up their ears, right, and their eyebrows, all of that went up, right, when Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen, and Joe Satriani came out, because these albums sold a lot. The record companies got behind them, and before you knew it, Steve Vai was releasing Passion and Warfare, and it sold 1 million copies on release. It was huge. I can remember going down to the pub and there were some girls at the bar who obviously weren't guitar playing, and they were all going gooey-eyed over the latest Steve Vai video that was playing on MTV, which I think was For the Love of God. And that created a market. And before you know it, you had your Tony McAlpines and your Vinnie Moores and your Richie Kotzens, and you had your Jason Beckers and your Paul Gilberts and your Scott Mishues and your how many can I get? It's like this is like a game. How many 8-inch shred guitars can you get? And the whole thing seemed to slowly wind in that everybody did start to sound the same. Right, I remember it, and I sort of lost interest. As a new guitar hero, they were doing this and they were doing that, and certain guitarists came out like Chris Impatelli that were there just because they were just so fast on their instrument. The whole thing started to grind to a halt. Then Nuno Bettencourt emerged in Extreme, and he was doing a lot of this stuff, but he had his own sound. It was very interesting, but he was much more of the old school rock guitarist. He was a fantastic rock guitarist, but he was working functionally within his band Extreme, right? I had worked from that point to listen to guitarists like Alan Holdsworth and John Scofield and Pat Metheny. Those are the guitarists I was listening to, really. My interest in straight guitarists was there, but those are the guitarists I really like. And a friend of mine that had come up in this sort of guitar era, he was going out and buying Holdsworth albums and all these, Stanley Jordan. We were all buying the same albums, right? Then, somewhere around about 1990, maybe late 80s, suddenly Stevie Ray Vaughan comes out. I can remember seeing him doing Superstitious on the TV. It was unbelievable. And suddenly there was a different type of virtuosity, a more conservative type of virtuosity, a virtuosity that went back to old blues guitars. Let's play with feel, let's make the hairs on the ends rather than just doing fast random notes. And then after that, a whole bunch of guitarists started to emerge. I remember Robert Cray, emerged, and then you had Jeff Healey in America. They sort of cottoned onto this sort of good-looking young white blues guitarist, and Johnny Lang came out, which has ended up with John Mayer. We now have John Mayer as the summation of all that stuff. And my friend suddenly lost interest in his Alan Holdsworth albums, and he wanted to, grab some of my Stevie Ray Vaughan albums. I loved them both. I had come up at a time when on the television, when I first started listening to music, there used to be a blues night on BBC Two once a year, and I can remember being very impressed by Buddy Guy. So, I've always loved blues guitar. I've always loved that type of expression. I've always loved experimentation. I do appreciate extreme technique, right? But the problem we've also got with this is that these guitarists that are working at home, they're no longer performing live. They don't stand up when they play, okay? They don't have an amp. If they don't walk around, so they don't have to control feedback. They don't have to play at high volumes. They don't have to try and communicate their solo to the person at the back of the room. They don't have to do all of these things. They can sit there in the huddled mass, getting their favourite licks out the best they can. And it's all going down on computer, linked up to an iPhone like this. And if they cock something up, they can do it again. And they can edit it together, because even the most basic of digital audio workstations now will edit audio at a level that in the 1970s and 80s we could not have imagined. And so cheating starts to crop in a little bit. It creeps in. It's like if you're doing a gig in the live band and you do a guitar solo, that's your guitar solo. That's it. That was your one chance. And if you blew it, you blew it. When multi-track recording started up, that was no longer the case. A guitarist could play the guitar solo, they could cock it up, they could say, I can do it again. The rest of the band could go home because they was on a separate track, right? Isolated. So he could do, or she could do like 80, 90 guitar solos and pick the best one. And then they started to realise if there was one bit from one guitar solo, there was another bit from another, they could edit that together. I'm going to tell you an interesting story about this now. One of the great jazz guitarists is a guitarist called George Benson, and one of his biggest hits is a track called Give Me the Night. If you watch the video on it, you will be impressed that not only does he play jazz guitar and sing and scat what he's playing, but he also roller skates backwards while he is doing this. It's a very impressive thing. Only George Benson could do this. I can't imagine Wes Montgomery or Joe Pass engaged in such incredible displays of coordination, but Mr. Benson, being perhaps the greatest jazz guitarist and singer on the planet, could do this. But when you look at that guitar solo, there's something strange about that guitar solo, right? When they were recording it, George Benson put his guitar solo down and he scattered it and it was all done. Dip, 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 dip. When they'd done all that, right? And then he went off on holiday or something like that. He wasn't there. And the engineer's mixing it, they're mixing it. And in the old days, you could erase over a recording, as that engineer famously did with Led Zeppelin on Led Zeppelin 3, that one track that starts with that big backwards reverb thing, because they erased the beginning of the track, right? At some point, the engineer erased part of George Benson's guitar solo. So they called up Lee Ritner, the great fusion guitarist, and came down and said, look, don't tell George, don't tell him, but we've lost part of his guitar solo, but we know what he was playing because we've still got the scat in. And so Lee Ritner had to play that part. So when you listen to that guitar solo, there's a bit on there which I think is a billy-doo, billy-doo, billy. It's the hard bit. It's not actually played by George Benson. Now, George Benson could play it, of course, but it gives you an idea of the artifice of modern recording going back 40 years. Now, you can do almost anything. Right, it's not just a matter of doing loads of takes. It's not a matter of correcting mistakes. Right, you can actually draw the guitar solo in. If you've played something fast and it's sloppy, it will tighten it up for you. If you hit a wrong note, you can put that note in tune. Now, I use this all the time here in my studio. If I'm putting a guitar solo down, a long time ago, I stopped trying to do great guitar solos. I wait till I've got the vibe. Right, I rarely edit guitar solos. I don't think I ever do that. I always try and get the guitar solo in one. But whilst I'm playing, if I hit a bum note, I just go, forget that. Forget that one bum note. So I might do a solo and it might be, I've got it nailed. It's really what I want. But there's two notes not quite right. And I will go in and I will go up to that note and I will pick it up on the little screen and I will push it up to a note that sounds better. And then I will go, that's good. And then I'll think, yeah, but you didn't really do that, did you? If somebody had been watching you, they were going, that's a good guitar solo, but you hit a couple of bum notes. And now it's like, oh, Andy's amazing. So a level of cheating has cropped in. And when you listen to the genres where these guitar solos are apparent, which will be modern metal, progressive metal, technical metal, sort of math rock, all that type of stuff, a lot of that playing is not real. It's been created on computer. And young guitarists are hearing this. Now, what I found with guitar and drums is because young guitarists are listening to this sort of computer-created playing. I'll give you an example of a Dragon Force. 10, 15 years ago, there was a band called Dragon Force came out. I don't believe any of that was real. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't real. So young guitarists are hearing that sort of stuff, and they're trying to emulate something that originally was a bit faked. And because of this, it's actually not only made the modern guitar playing conformed, but it's actually pushing up what is technically possible. So there's incredible guitarists out there now, young guys that have listened to all this stuff for real, and they can pull it off. And they play in a way where it sounds edited. They play in a way where it sounds perfect. Now, the big sensation at the moment is Matteo Mancuso. And I want to talk to him a little bit. I'm not here to knock Matteo Mancuso. I'm not here to knock him. I think he's a fantastic guitarist. I think that he has gained notoriety because rather than playing with the plectrum, he plays with his fingers, and he plays at astonishing speeds with his fingers. Also, it seems to us who play with the plectrum, this is a little bit like something that we're not used to, but in the classical world, every guitarist plays like that. And when people start to work with the plectrum, and you look at something that ends up with a player like Frank Gambale, which is just astonishing what he's doing with the plectrum. But that is the one interesting thing for me about Matteo Mancuso. But when I hear it, I hear that same predictable tone, and I hear the same adherence to a certain way of playing a certain type of lick. So if you're Matteo Mancuso and you've emerged into this world and you've been discovered on Instagram and now everyone's championing you, what do you do? How do you have the guts to go, well, I just want to play a musical guitar, so I just want to play what I feel. I just want to express myself. No, it becomes an industry for you where you have to do this. You know the solo will start in a certain way, melodic, and then we're going to get some fast licks, and then you'll go through a series of different types of licks. One's interval skipping, some sweeping licks, some tap licks, some fast legato, and then some fast, in his case, his little fingers going like that, but that would be the picking licks. And you know that's what you're going to get. And and I hate to use this term, the backing track, because that's what it is. The backing track is just there to service the it's just there as the bed on which to jump through these cliched hoops. Now, I think Matteo Mancuso, in the old, I think he's a fantastic guitarist. I think I really do. I think he's fantastic, and I'm not knocking his guitar playing. I think this is more of a problem of production. That's what I think. In the old days when guitarists emerged, if you were a Steve Vai or Yngwie Malmsteen, you could go and get the gig with Alcatraz. If you were a Marty Friedman, you could go and get the gig with Megadeth. If you were Jason Becker, you could get the gig with Steve Vai, and then you would be working with songwriters and producers, and then you would have to work within those confines. And I think we are missing that with the internet. Now, my conclusion on all this is, I hope by doing videos like this, rather than being negative, I hope that people will see that there is a way, if you're inclined, as I have done with Mark and Roy on the Law of Three album, to be able, without label support, to fund a CD, get it out there. And the way to do it is by having people on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook that are championing creative music making, creative instrumental music making. I think that's very important, and I'm very lucky to have that platform. I don't think we'd be making this album if I wasn't able to come here now and promote this album. Now, you may say, well, surely you've only done this video to promote this album, Andy. It's obvious, really. You've going, come on, and you've done a clickbaity title we were all watching, and then we've seen your band, and some of us have all been duped into clicking on it, maybe buy the album. That aspect of a band trying to do creative work and trying to get it out there, and then having to sort of pass the creativity, stealth-like under people's noses, is the situation we live in right now. And so I felt, morally, yes, let's put that video in there. We've spent a lot of work on it. I do believe that if you listen to the track that you heard in this video, then you will be listening to something that hasn't been done on guitar before, whether you like it or not. Okay? And so you can at least say, well, it's interesting what they're doing. It's not my thing, but it's interesting, And that relates. That is like a counterbalance, I think, to what is going on the internet in terms of guitar. I am now going to finish this video. That is the end of this one. And so if you like this video, please put a like on. If you want to know more, you can subscribe. Please press the subscription button. We have a Patreon. When I said we, it was a royal we. I said we because I am now so close with my patrons and they're so involved in what I'm doing that I'm now seeing us as a collective. So if you want to come and join my collective, you can come and join me over on Patreon. It is a lot of fun. I can see in a year's time, I will be basically working with the patrons who are all, because of the nature of my channel, all very interesting musicians and music listeners. The world needs good music listeners. They will save the day. When I finish this video, I'm about to do a video which will be called, something like, is music going to go? Is it dead? I think it's going to be, let's say goodbye to music or something like that. It's going to be something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so you can look forward to that depressing video as well. But if you want to support me over on Patreon, come over. This is important. I know that this is important. I know that we need to be here talking about this stuff. We do. I hope there's some young people watching. I hope in my main audience, who seem to be around about between 70 and 80, as they slowly peg it, that they will get replenished. And then when I peg it, I'm hoping someone else will take over. And we will be here, a little sacred oasis of musical creativity. All right? And through this, musicians will be able to come who are interested in expressing themselves creatively in a musical fashion, not just jumping over a bunch of technical hoops so everyone could clap them at how clever they were. All right? And if you are interested in that, there is always juggling. If you don't want to join my Patreon, you can support me with my PayPal tip jar. If you want to put a donation in there, that would be very welcome. That is what is funding me to make these videos. And I think today that this one actually looks quite nice because I got a light and I positioned the light and I've been able to learn a little bit. I'm not very good at this bit, you see. I'm too slapdash. I have to make a lot of videos, you know. I make 4 videos a week and it really kills me. And if one doesn't quite work and I don't get the camera work, it's tough. It has to go out, you know. Anyway, hope you like this video. Please go and check out the Law of 3 album and put your comments down below. And remember, I was just discussing the question of why do all guitarists sound the same? I don't think they all do, but it does when somebody says that, in quotes, that they are pointing to something that is apparent in the world. They're not 100% wrong. It's called nuance, you know. It's a thing that we used to have in the old days. All right, I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.